Welcome everyone. This is the panel on models of psychedelic therapy. My name is Dr. Janice Phelps and I have the honor of being the moderator for this panel. I'll be introducing each of the panelists to you, and then I will be looking at the Q&A for the most highly popular questions for the panelists, and then I will ask them those questions at the end. And we'll be saving the Q&A for after everyone has presented. So I'll first introduce Dr. Ido Simeon, who is a certified Hakomi teacher and co-founder of the Hakomi Institute of Israel. He holds a PhD in East-West psychology and an MA in somatic psychology, both from the California Institute of Integral Studies, where we both happen to come from. Ido is a trainer for MAPS, and in Israel, he is a clinical investigator in the phase 2 MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for acute PTSD trials, and is now also a clinical investigator in the phase 3 trials that examine the impact of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy on severe trauma victims or those with PTSD. Please welcome Dr. Ido Simeon.
So hello everybody. I will share for us a presentation. Okay, so the name of our presentation, the Hakomi Method in Psychedelic Psychotherapy, Guiding Principles and Somatic Interventions. So when we're going into doing psychedelic therapy and we're gonna reach for a treatment model, the first thing to think, what are we looking for? So we're looking for a psychotherapeutic approach that is based in a presence-centered therapeutic container, which means that we're here. We're present, we're mindful, we're available with our bodies, our emotions, our awareness. And that's sort of the basis of where we want to come from. The next thing that we're looking for maybe is an approach that knows how to engage experience and offers appropriate experiential interventions within psychedelic sessions. So of course, psychedelic sessions are experiential. Experience is very intense and very wide ranging. And of course, we want our approach to be one that can somehow contact this experience and then know how to work with it. So that's kind of another thing that we might be looking for in the psychedelic approach. And at last, we want an approach that offers a theoretical perspective that helps understand the variety of psychedelic experiences and accordingly can support the integration of these experiences into a process of human development. So the idea is that as humans, we're always developing, and people become depressed or anxious when they get stuck. They get stuck somehow, and they're not able to move through and continue to learn from life and develop. So if we can have a therapeutic approach that helps us understand where people are stuck, it can help us both in the sessions themselves and later in the integration process. So a little bit about Hakomi. The principles and the foundations of a method. It's a therapeutic approach. It was founded in the 1970s and 80s by Ron Kurtz. And he used to read a lot of stuff and was influenced by many different schools of knowledge and thought. The first thing that was relevant was Buddhism and Taoism, which he kind of studied in depth. And from Buddhism and Taoism, he took the principles of mindfulness, loving presence, and non-violence. So kind of you can see that the foundation of the therapeutic stance in Hakomi is a stance that we're here. We're here with our hearts and we're accepting, and we're also very mindful. You know, we're aware of what's going on in experience in this moment. And when we're engaging our experience or the client's experience, we're doing it non-violently. A second influence is somatic psychotherapy. He was a student of bioenergetics and Gestalt. And somatic psychotherapy teaches us of the importance of the integration of body and mind, and also possibly spirit. Yeah. That our mind is reflected in our body and in our bodily experience, and our bodily experience, from it emerges thought and thought processes. So these are very closely linked. And in psychedelic therapy, we can really experience this connection. And then, of course, he was influenced by living systems theory. Living systems theory really talks about how everything is both a part of something and a whole in itself. You know, so a cell of a human body is part of a tissue in the human body. A tissue may be part of an organ of our liver. Our liver is part of us being total organisms, human organisms, with both mind and body. We're part of families, and we're part of communities, and we're part of the ecosystem, and so on. So the spirit of Hakomi really is in understanding this unity. And also living systems theory tells us that as living systems, when we're in touch in all dimensions of our experience, we tend to move towards healing, and we tend to move towards growth. So when we're in touch with our inner experience, with our sensations, with our impulses, feelings, thoughts, images, we really begin to naturally develop. Yeah? And I think what happens in psychedelic sessions is all our inner experience gets magnified. Sensations, impulses, feelings, thoughts, everything gets magnified. And it's an opportunity for us to heal wherever is needed and to continue growing. What I want to show you is a short video clip from the movie Trip of Compassion. It's from the MAPS Phase 2 MDMA for PTSD. Some of you maybe have seen the movie. It's been screened twice. And I want to give you a few tips on what to look for. So you'll see me working with a patient. And what I want you to see is how he organizes once he has emotional pain comes up, how he avoids any distances in the relationship with me. Then you can see how I strive for repair through physical and emotional holding. And then you can see the relaxation and the harmonious flow of emotional energy that results from the intervention. And then also see if you can kind of generally open your eyes to see how the whole unfolding process is held within these guiding principles of mindfulness, of loving presence, of body-mind. And of course, this is, and if you look at the whole intervention, it's an attachment-based intervention. So here it comes.
מרגיש שהברז שלי נפתח, מים עוברים, מים טהורים, שיש תזוזה, שיש תנועה, שיש שינוי. אני חושב שעד עכשיו הצינור היה 70 סנטימטר. עכשיו הוא נפתח, כאן נפתח. זה נעים. זה נעים. אני מרגיש את זה.
Okay, so hopefully you kind of were able to get a taste of this method and how it works with the psychedelics, how it kind of they come together, and how these principles of Hakomi really can support psychedelic work. Here you can see it with MDMA. So I want to thank you very much for being with me today, and I'm sure you will enjoy the next presentations. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Ido. So we'll move on to our next presenter, and his name is Dan Kamen, and he holds an MA in spiritual care from VU University, Amsterdam. He has a private practice as a Buddhist psychedelic chaplain and works for Synthesis Retreats as a lead facilitator and lead health screener. He has years of experience offering psychedelic harm reduction work on festivals and worked as an alcohol and drug counselor. His presentation is partly based on an article to be published in the Dutch Journal for Spiritual Care. And welcome to Dan.
So welcome. I want to start my presentation by sharing a story from my work at Synthesis. We are an organization that offers guided psychedelic experiences, and the story that I would like to share happened shortly after I started working there. At the time, we followed some of the approaches that were developed by Bill Richards and Roland Griffiths. And we would offer flight instructions to help prepare clients navigate potentially challenging psychedelic experiences. And during these, we encourage them to engage with challenging, scary, or otherwise disconcerting figures that might reveal themselves to them by asking them questions, asking them what they could learn from them. And from my own spiritual background, I shared the story of the Buddha inviting Mara, the Buddhist devil, for a cup of tea and engaging him in conversation. But after our instruction, two people disclosed to a colleague of mine that, as devout Christians, they felt incredibly uncomfortable welcoming or inviting devils or demons to tea, let alone to learn from them. Such figures were to be chased away, and them showing up might actually be a test of their faith. And praying seemed to them to be a much more suitable approach to facing them. Another colleague who trained with an indigenous tribe in the Amazon, she added, well, in our tradition too, we would never just invite all animals or figures in that way. Certain animals, for example, are simply bad omens to be scared off or avoided at all costs. So what this experience shows is what can happen when a guide, me in this case, fails to properly address the existential or spiritual needs of a client. And in that moment, I was once more reminded of the importance of the practices that I received in my training in interfaith spiritual care. So the main task of a spiritual caregiver is to aid clients in finding meaning in their lives or help them facing and potentially embracing the lack thereof. We often meet our clients when they face an existential crisis engendered by terminal illness, imprisonment, war, addiction, or mental health problems, to name just a few. So spiritual care is concerned with being present to and accompanying the patient in their suffering, helping them find peace as opposed to fixing or curing their suffering. Spiritual caregivers often have their own faith commitments. They meet people of their own spiritual background and those with different orientations. For example, as a practicing Buddhist, I often work with other Buddhists, but I also guide Christians, atheists, and Jewish people. In fact, most of the encounters between spiritual caregivers and other therapeutic professionals and their clients are interfaith encounters, at least to a certain extent. Because people's moralities these days are no longer stipulated by grand narratives, but rather have become individual meaning-making endeavors, often drawing on various religious, humanist, or spiritual sources for inspiration. Hence, even when a spiritual caregiver meets a client with a shared religious background, assuming that that background is the same might actually neglect important differences between their individual moralities. And so in interfaith spiritual care, the best practice is to center on the existential needs of the client and engaging their frameworks of orientation. Because psychedelic experiences are often rich in existentially relevant material, and because with an ever-growing number of people from increasingly diverse religious, spiritual, or existential backgrounds being exposed to psychedelics, we need to develop and cultivate the competencies to support clients preparing for and understanding their experiences in a language that makes sense to them. These notions that we're playing around with right now are some of the important reasons for me to start developing a model for psychedelic chaplaincy. So I understand psychedelic chaplaincy to be a form of interfaith spiritual care that seeks to support clients preparing for, undergoing, and integrating psychedelic experiences, and helping them understand what place those experiences have within their moral, relational, and embodied lives. The use of the concept morality here, I borrow from Charles Taylor, and he perceives morality as a vision of the good. He understands morality as frameworks of orientation, of visions of a life worth living. And hence, morality needs to be understood quite broadly, as encompassing one's spirituality, religious beliefs, and existential outlook on life. Crystal L. Park's concept of the process of meaning-making itself informs my understanding. She writes, "Meaning-making typically involves searching for a more favorable understanding of the situation and its implications. Meaning-making may also entail reconsidering global beliefs and revising goals, and questioning or revising one's sense of meaning in life. So the model that I propose understands meaning or morality to be deeply embodied and to always take form and shape in relationship, in relation to ourselves, to our surroundings, and to our fellow human beings or other life forms." So the psychedelic chaplaincy is interested in making sense of the phenomenologically rich and existentially or spiritually relevant material that can emerge during psychedelic experiences. But it's independent of whether those experiences are clinical, recreational, or spiritual in their nature. That existential material may or may not be intertwined with the physical or mental health problems that the client might suffer from or is receiving treatment for. And as such, it is usually not the primary focus of traditional psychotherapies. Psychedelic chaplaincy, therefore, is less concerned with symptom reduction or diagnosis or treatment and more with religious questions. These are questions in the worlds of theologian and philosopher Paul Tillich of ultimate concern. Now, because of the limited time today, I would like to focus on one core concept at the heart of psychedelic chaplaincy, which is spiritual integrity. And I define spiritual integrity as the rights of clients to integrate and understand their own experiences, their own psychedelic experiences, in a way that is commensurable with their faith commitments or their existential outlook on life, or with changes therein as a consequence of those psychedelic experiences. So let's circle back to my opening story. Remember the two Christian clients that were invited to serve the devil some tea when he would show himself to them. Now, my blind spot at the time, despite my training, was that I had assumed that our flight instructions were neutral enough to facilitate the different worldviews of our clients. And the problem that lurks here is actually way more widespread than one might think, and it isn't limited to flight instructions. Nicholas Langlich, for example, he spoke on this conference, Jules Evans, and the brilliant mind that recently passed away, Martin Fourtier, they have all argued in their own ways that due to the heavy focus on mystical breakthroughs, especially in the North American psychedelic-assisted psychotherapeutic models, and due to the perennial philosophical underpinnings of those models, the dominant contemporary approaches to doing and studying psychedelics, or the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies based thereon, they might appear to us as existentially neutral, whereas they are actually particular expressions of certain worldviews or of certain convictions that we hold. Namely, in this case, that at the core of all religions and spiritualities, one finds a universally available and accessible sort of consciousness. The philosophical idea is that all religions are merely different expressions of the same thing, be that God, emptiness, nature, or even the brain. As a spiritual caregiver, I'm concerned with the actual and concrete impact of these very often subtle assumptions that we as guides hold on the everyday lives of our clients. And so I wish to offer some insights from interfaith spiritual care to help navigate this potentially negative impact. So the question that I try to answer is how to avoid a conflict of or a tension between the different moral perspectives without losing the capacity to really support, guide, and aid clients as they prepare for, undergo, or integrate their psychedelic experiences. Interfaith spiritual care offers us basically three approaches to this problem. And at the core of these different approaches lies the capacity to create a third space, an in-between space, in between two spiritual worlds or discourses, and it requires the knowledge of the other person's spirituality. The first such an approach is known as neutralizing, in which spiritual caregivers would emphasize commonalities between their own and their clients' perspectives. Pesut and Reimer Kierkegaard speak about eliciting patients' meaning systems as a means to transcend difference and create a safe, sacred space. This, however, it could easily lean into a perennialist or universalist approach, in which the potentially incommensurable concepts are treated as if they are the same, or the differences are downplayed, or they remain unmentioned altogether. So the risk of neutralizing is losing the capacity to value the client's beliefs or potentially even negate relevant particularities to that belief. So compare that to code switching, which is the capacity to code switch or move between religious languages, symbols, and sometimes rituals in their work, in working with patients and their families. So in code switching, rather than neutralizing the differences, the spiritual caregiver actively uses the framework of the client. However, again, there's an inherent risk here, which is how realistic is it for each given professional that works with a client to understand the particularities of their beliefs? So can they provide care in the code of their client? So the last approach is that of hermeneutical experimenting. It's a playful experiment in exploring both worldviews that can result in a deeper self-understanding by highlighting the differences and exploring similarities. In this approach, rather than assuming an underlying or universal dimension of spirituality or a perennial core, worldviews are treated like languages that help us express ourselves and make sense of the world, each language opening up and closing off certain possibilities. So I don't want to claim any solutions to the problems that we just discussed, but I do wish to raise some awareness of them and show how the professional field of spiritual care and chaplaincy have approached these problems and have developed sophisticated ways of becoming aware of one's own existential views, as well as the capacity of articulating them, thereby mitigating the risk of assuming one's own personal understanding, no matter how deeply wrapped up with secular, neutral, or professional language, is universally applicable. Psychedelic chaplaincy seeks to start a deep conversation around the skills and competencies needed for both religious and psychotherapeutic professionals when working with the existentially rich material of psychedelic experiences, and it explores different methods of working with clients while safeguarding their spiritual integrity.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you to Ido. I would like to let everyone know that unfortunately Tim Reed will not be with us today due to an illness. So we will work with Ido and Dan and drill down through some of the questions. So I'd like to start with one for Ido. And this is a question that comes up in the training that I do quite a bit. It's around physical touch and holding. Ido, what do you think about this? This is from Lou. I find myself torn from about physical holding. It seems so natural, but also so different from my hands-off clinical practice. Can you comment?
Yes, I'd be happy. I think my video is off. I'm wondering if they can see me. Somehow somebody in the tech team should allow. Okay. Okay, here I am. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're great. We can see and hear you.
Okay, great. So I think touch is really it's something to be learned. You know, in me coming from Hakomi, we use touch all the time, and of course it has ethical issues, and we want to know who we're working with, their history, and when we're using touch, we want to be able to track our clients or patients very well. We want to ask permission, and then we want to see how people respond, and not only what they say consciously, but also what their body says. So sometimes we might ask someone, do you want a hand for support? And they'll say yes, but they'll recoil with their bodies backwards. So we want to be able to kind of track that and respond appropriately. And of course, I think it's important that psychedelic therapists that come from this approach really be versed well in body-oriented modalities of therapy. And I think as long as we're doing that and we learn how to do this, we have to learn how to apply it to psychedelics. But I think it's definitely possible, and it's very helpful too.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. We may circle back around to that. So I have one for Dan. This is from Tom. How would you distinguish between morality and ideology? And would you distinguish between it? And if yes, how would you distinguish it?
I think the conception of morality as a quite broadly encompassing outlook on life, if you will, would potentially also include ideology. And an interesting example that we could share from my work is that sometimes people understand themselves through a very anarchistic or Marxist lens, and a view of they really use some more of the spiritual work of Marx, for example, to give meaning to their life. Marx speaks of the homo faber, so the human being will flourish truly when he has a chance to work, and to work in a way that is unalienated from the fruits of that labor. that someone does. So if that's the sort of perspective that someone brings to the practice that I engage in with them, then I'm very willing to engage with that as a worldview. And in that sense, I would kind of treat them as one and the same. But I think ideology is rather narrow and has a lot of political connotations that morality is less bothered by, I think. Yeah.
So Janice,
Does that
maybe
answer it?
time for one last question, and we can still play the video of Tim, of course.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I have one from Renuka, and this is for Dan again, but I invite Ido to answer if he feels so inclined. This could be our last one, unfortunately. So quickly, do you believe that current Western psychotherapy has room for psychedelic chaplaincy? What is your suggestion for combining spiritual care with mainstream psychiatric care and encouraging such an integrative model? Big question, short amount of time.
I love this question. One of the things I unfortunately needed to cut out of my presentation is actually addressing this. And in short, I truly believe that when spiritual caregivers and chaplains are going to be involved in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, there's numerous ways in which they can contribute to the field. And especially when psychotherapists have been trained in existentially focused or spiritually informed modalities, they would definitely be capable of picking this up rather quickly. The other thing that I would propose is that, as actually you, Janice, suggest in your article, is that as a therapist, you need to be able to be present with your own life in a more spiritual way, with your own suffering, with your own life and being. And I think spiritual caregivers have a unique opportunity to actually sit down with professionals and talk about how the experiences of their clients might actually challenge their ontological assumptions. For example, when a client comes back with reports of their past lives or with prenatal experiences, or they transformed into other human beings, it could also be demanding for a psychotherapist to make sense of that within their own worldview. And I think that's another way in which psychedelic chaplaincy could contribute to the field. But I would always be in favor of an integration of this work. At the same time, as a last piece, I do believe that because there's so many people for whom their worldviews are very important, that we should start looking into the development of, for example, Christian models or Tibetan Buddhist models or Islamic models to offer psychedelic care. And maybe to even offer psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, but within a language that makes sense to a client. So I think there's different ways of approaching some of these problems, but I would always be in favor of an integration between different disciplines.
I think you've made that emphatically clear that in the meanwhile, we can learn code switching, and that's important, but then we need to get in clinicians who understand these different faiths to offer suggestions. So that's for the future. And thank you so much for your cutting edge work. Ido, thank you for your cutting edge work. I think we're about to see Tim's recording, and then if there is any time left for Q&A after Tim's recording shown, then we'll come back to both Dan and Ido.
Hello everybody, my name's Tim Reed, and I'm going to talk about The Dark Place. So this is really about some of the more difficult territory that we may encounter in psychedelic journeys, and to give a very brief map about how to understand and maybe think about working with it. So rather than talking about the places of love, compassion, connection and empowerment, really talking more about the places of unlove, disconnection, alienation, those jagged places, the places of hopelessness that we may come across in our own journeys and the journeys through which we support others. And these are not places that we just need to find a way of getting through to survive. They're really important parts of the journey, because these are the ways in which we access our deep psyche, our hidden wounds. in the supported setting, of course, the aim is to welcome this unconscious material so that the wounds can be healed and can lose their destructive power. But these areas of the psyche are really complex. Some of the content of the psychedelic journey we may be able to attach a narrative to, may relate to events we've experienced in our biographical life. But as we go deeper, we go into the unconscious areas of our psyche, beyond our conscious awareness. And these states are so much harder to grasp, to articulate, to attach conscious memories to. And of course, it becomes so visceral. The meaning is amplified by the psychedelic experience. You get archetypal content. We feel it so deeply, we re-experience it. It's like a catharsis. And as well as feeling it emotionally, often it has a very somatic physical feeling as well. But it's so important that we fully surrender to the process and support others in fully surrendering to the process, immerse ourselves, be as open as we can, fully experience emotionally and physically. So anyone who works with psychedelics needs to have some understanding of these darker places, of the territory that it represents, how to think about them, how to work with them in a way that heals rather than just becomes another traumatic experience. So where are these wounds? Where are these icebergs in our psyche? I'll share a screen briefly. Here we go. And so this baby is obviously in a state of extreme distress and is making his feelings known about it. We all have these states locked within us, although hopefully we're better at expressing them. The point I want to make here is that the baby doesn't know what feelings he's expressing. It's inchoate, it's nameless. It's just a really shit feeling. And sometimes we just had to stay with these feelings. And this is the other side of that coin. This speaks to maternal presence, facilitator presence, the holding, the managing, the containing, the metabolizing of these difficult feelings, so that it becomes part of the skeleton of our personality, something that's useful that we can grow from. So traditionally, our models of mind, psychoanalysis, etc., have thought that a lot of the icebergs in our personality structures, our wounds, lie in childhood development, infantile development in particular. But Stan Grof has taken it a lot further. I just want to go through this very, very quickly. I think everybody needs to have some understanding of this layer of psyche. Stan Grof, the pioneer of LSD psychotherapy, has been to psychedelics what Freud was to psychoanalysis. And he sat for over 2,000 LSD sessions, supervised many more. And what he found was that the bedrock of psyche, the deepest points, come back to the birth process. And of course, the birth process is so incredibly violent. It's much more violent than anything that the vast majority of us are going to experience in the rest of our lives. And that leaves an imprint over which we build our psychological defenses. But what Grof found, and I think he's right, is that the residue of this state is often a determinant of the way we position ourselves in the world. So just to go through it very quickly, the first stage is primal fusion of mother, all your needs being met, bliss. The second stage is the onset of labour, the crushing of the uterus, mother turns against you, you're being rejected, something horrible is happening, and your existence is in threat. There's no way out. Horrible place to be. The third stage is the perilous journey through the birth canal, which really does hold a threat of extinction, of death. The body is subjected to twisting forces, being crushed, etc. And fourth stage, of course, is the miracle of birth, the emergence into the outside world, the use of lungs for the first time, being in the world in a completely different way, meeting your mother in the outside world for the first time. So how does this translate into the sort of experiences that we're interested in? Well, I've divided them into four positions, which I will go through very quickly. So these positions are within us anyway, and they're developmental positions, and we can re-access them in a particularly intense and visceral state in our psychedelic journeys. So they're rooted within us. And we flow through them often in a dynamic way. Maybe within a session or a series of sessions, we may be particularly focused in one position, but sometimes one session can have elements of all four. So the futile position is so important, and it's characterized by pervasive feelings of despair, constriction, alienation, and hopelessness. This is very different to ordinary sadness. It really feels as though there is no way out. It's a deep, dark, hopeless, cynical state. We probably all have this within us to some extent, and many of us have constructed elaborate layers of defences against it. And Groff located the roots of this structure to the beginning of the labour process, when the contractions start and mother basically turns against you. As facilitators, we need to hold the hope when the situation seems hopeless. We may need to offer words of encouragement, remind people that this is for work, stay with it, this is important. We need to build up a sufficient therapeutic relationship with people so that they trust us sufficiently so we can support them through it, and even encourage them to surrender more deeply to the experience, maybe even see how hopeless you can get today, make the hopelessness worse. Sometimes as facilitators, we may even revisit that area of the futile position ourselves due to the tightness of the emotional space that we get into with the people that we're guiding. And the futile position is often associated with powerful somatic feelings that may have a very constricting nature. So maybe we also need to know something about methods of working with this in the physical way, body work, appropriate physical release. And sometimes the futile position does not resolve within or even after the session. So occasionally we need to have aftercare strategies for how to take care of people. So moving on to the death rebirth position, Albert Hoffman in the first LSD journey, I mean, he thought he was going to die. But then the next day he describes this wonderful feeling of positive transfiguration, where he felt so alive and the world was glistening. And I guess most of us have our own versions of that experience. The psychedelic experience is very well known for taking people through the death experience. And indeed the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece were notorious for helping people to find accommodation with death so they could feel more fully alive. But touching this layer of psyche can bring up some very challenging material. It may have a pornographic content, scatological content, maybe sensations of physical energy, like kundalini, or may feel more like sexual energy. There may be physical movements, there may be writhing sensations, and again, the role of a facilitator is to provide encouragement, stay with it, and sometimes even help with physical methods such as appropriate body work. There's often a close relationship between the death rebirth position and the paranoid position. Indeed, Albert Hoffman, in his first LSD experience, he thought he was going to die, and then he thought that his friendly neighbour who tried to help him by bringing him some milk, he thought she was a witch. It's unusual for these paranoid reactions to be sustained, and I'm not talking about sustained paranoid reactions, more the normal sort of paranoid processes that can really arise in any of us. So if you think back to that picture of a distressed baby, for that baby, the cause of his distress was the world outside him. The world was doing something horrible to him, and we can all revisit those states when we're stressed. So the paranoid position is an important part of ego development. In psychedelic journeys, it's more likely to become problematic when there's a failure of setting, so when the setting is not set up properly, failure of support, where there is dominance of paranoid structures in personality development, or sometimes where early trauma can be reactivated. It's absolutely crucial, as any paranoid processes are fully and completely resolved within the session. No one should go home feeling in a paranoid state. And it's always about the reorientation of somebody back to their inner processes, back to the curiosity, back to the mindful attitude, what's happening in here rather than what is happening out there. And resolution, or the moving through paranoid processes, leads us to the mourned position. And of course, mourning is such an important part of psychological life. Freud's arguably most influential paper was Mourning and Melancholia, which really described how depressive states often seem to arise as a failure of mourning. Mourning involves a letting go, and an ability to form new attachments. We know from bereavement studies how grief is a healthy process, and the blockage of the expression of grief is what tends to cause depression. Mourning is maturational, promotes resilience, and allows a wider way of being in the world. One of the great fruits of a psychedelic journey is that it allows mourning, allows moving through to a position of acceptance, of grief, of sadness. And sadness feels so different from the futile position. It's a coming to terms, moving to a more productive position. And of course, mourning is an ongoing process that can be repeated in successive journeys. And the archetypal nature, the amplification of the mourning process, the perspectival shifts allowed by the psychedelic journey just often make the mourning process so much more efficient. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for listening, and maybe we'll revisit some of these themes in the Q&A at the end.
Wonderful presentation. I see we have 3 more minutes for Q&A. I'd like to ask both Ido and Dan a question related to Tim's talk. So we weave Tim into this panel, and then we'll see if we can answer another question from the Q&A. I would like to say, to remind people that we've got a meetup with this panel immediately after this gets concluded. So I hope that Ido and Dan will be able to answer those questions for those of you who can stay with us. But for now, here's one from Tim that I've crafted for both of you. Tim brought out issues that neither of you did, although Dan glanced at it a bit, and so did Ido. This is around the dark part, the difficult part, the existential angst part of these journeys. What do you think about Tim's suggestion in the heart of that darkness, whether using holotropic breathwork or psychedelics, that we encourage our person we're working with, our client, see how hopeless you can get right now? That was a very provocative comment from Tim. And it comes from Stan Groff as well. What do you two think about that idea? Let's see how hopeless you can get right now, because you're not quite in there yet enough, we think.
No, my thoughts about it is that I think the spirit of the work, in many ways, is the spirit of surrender. And I think that maybe Tim's suggestion or Stan Groff's suggestion talks to what happens when our clients really resist moving into their experiences. So something like see how hopeless you can get is a way to maybe help them really surrender into what's happening. So I think in that spirit, I'm positive for that spirit. I'm also cautious for taking a general, this is what you do when. Sometimes when people are in the dark places, that's not what they need. They just need somebody there really with their hearts and holding their hands. Okay, let's be here together. Just take your time, and I trust that we can move through this. So yes, yeah. Sometimes this, sometimes something else.
Thank you. We have 1 minute. If Dan could jump in and offer something. Thank you, Ido.
I think I'll just repeat what Ido just said. I would really agree with the way you put that. I would add that there can also be a deeply emotional corrective experience, stepping into hopelessness or the sense of abandonment, for example, and really experiencing that this time you're not being abandoned, or that this time there is this loving, compassionate presence. And I think it boils down to attunement of the guide to the client, and to have this intuition, and also sort of being informed by a lot of science and research about what might work. And what I loved in Ido's talk actually was to be able to offer also somatic reassurance, and to really work with the body in those moments, because the verbal is often too difficult to comprehend for clients. So to do this in a fully embodied way would be what I would advise.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Brilliant answers on both your parts. Thank you. And I think we're needing to adjourn here. I'll let any of the organizers present have the last word here. And then drawing your attention to the chat, it's been uploaded how to access the meetup next. And Ido and Dan, people are asking for your email address, if you'd have a moment to pop it in there if you're open to that before we close.
I think mine is already in the chat. A colleague has been so kind to put it there, and I see the other one now too.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, when we close the Zoom, the chat will be gone, so make sure you copy paste. And we will have a breakout room as well. I think Ido and I will go there together, right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ido. Thank you, Tim, as well, who's not here at the moment. And thank you, Janice, for moderating. I think it was a really interesting panel and a very important topic as well to discuss. So now we have a 1 hour break. At 7, we have a violin concert, actually. So for the ones that would like to join that, maybe during their dinner or during their lunch, that is a really great idea. And after that, we have 3 different panels and tracks coming up. And one is about therapeutic frameworks. The other one is about ecodelics. And the other one is psychometrics. And finally, I want to say that we still have the posters online. So please check the posters and vote for the ones that you like the most, because the ones that have the best or the most favorite poster will receive a prize tomorrow. So please do check this out, and see you all soon. Thank you very much, and have a nice lunch, dinner, breakfast, or whatever it will be. So thank you. See you.